Well, you might remember the PM with great fanfare announced the appointment of a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. He charged her with reporting to the government ways that anti-Semitism could be dealt with. Then he appointed a special envoy to combat Islamophobia, presumably to prove he wasn't favouring Jews by trying to stamp out anti-Semitism. When he received the report on combating anti-Semitism, he said he couldn't act on it until he'd also received the report on Islamophobia. And so the report on combating anti-Semitism sat in the PM's bottom drawer, gathering dust, while anti-Semitism ramped up around the country. Then Jews were shot dead on Bondi Beach, and the government appears to have remembered it had a report on combating anti-Semitism and has decided to implement some of its recommendations. And they think they deserve credit for that. So late last month, the Albanese government announced an education task force led by Jewish leader David Gonski aimed at embedding Holocaust, anti-Semitism and Australian values education across schools and universities. Here to discuss it, education editor at The Australian, Natasha Bita. Natasha, the obvious question I have to ask at the outset is, did it take an act of terror for action in our schools and our universities on anti-Semitism?
Well, obviously it did, because that recommendation was sitting there for nearly 6 months and had been put on the agenda for a meeting of the nation's education ministers next month. So it clearly wasn't seen as anything urgent until what happened in Bondi, until that massacre.
Well, we know universities have been a hotbed for hatred, particularly from 2023 when we had pro-Palestinian encampments allowed to fester across major metropolitan campuses. How convinced are you that this task force, announced by the Albanese government, will deliver real accountability and change, particularly in the tertiary sector?
Well, it's always been so difficult to force universities to do anything because they're not really accountable to anyone, despite getting $20 billion a year of taxpayers' money. When they, for example, investigate allegations of anti-Semitism that appear to be very public, it's all done in secrecy. Nothing to see here, privacy, commercial and confidence. We've got it under control, it's okay. My argument is there needs to be transparency because that's the only thing that will make them change, is to be accountable to the public, because they're very, very worried about their brand and their image.
Yeah, right. Good point. You've written extensively about the broader impacts of liberal-leaning universities and the kind of reforms that are needed to hold our tertiary educators to account, as you say. Following Bondi, do you think universities have genuinely reflected on their failure to confront extremist rhetoric on campuses, or are they still more concerned with appeasing activist groups than protecting students and staff?
Well, I think they've sniffed the breeze and they've realised that they can no longer just appeal to whatever trendy, activist group is, gaining traction on Twitter. It appears to be what's happened. I have seen, for example, University of Queensland, where they would mark students down for using the word mankind, because mankind was a sexist term, you had to use humanity. Still got man in it, right? They were allowing people to fly a terrorist flag at their encampment. And it was only taken down when my colleague, a journalist, Mackenzie Scott, called them up about it, because they didn't even realise what was going on their own sort of quad. They were putting up with behaviour that your typical school principal would not tolerate in a school. It was a lot of bullying behaviour, anti-Semitism, intimidating people on campus. Universities were saying, Vice Chancellors were saying, oh, we don't know what to do, we can't do anything about it. And I was saying, well, turn the sprinklers on, that'll get rid of them pretty quickly. I just don't think that... But I think it is good for people to debate, and it's good for people to have different ideas and to discuss those ideas. These encampments were not free debate. They were just people causing trouble. It was kind of seen as fun for all the students wanting to do it with their mates. And it was incredibly intimidating for anyone who was Jewish. I have seen videos at Monash University where a Jewish student was sitting with a Jewish flag, Israeli flag around his shoulders, and a pro-Palestinian protester had a megaphone right on his ear and was screaming slogans into this megaphone. And the university just had a security guard just looking at it. I mean, this behaviour would not be acceptable in a workplace, in a school, as I said, and yet the university seemed to tolerate it.
And Vice-Chancellors, most of them on well over $1 million a year, you'd think they'd be able to at least control their own students. What concrete reforms then, whether around, I don't know, codes of conduct, curriculum oversight, or even consequences for staff, are needed to restore confidence that universities are places of learning, not political indoctrination? There'll be a lot of parents watching, like myself, who have got kids who have just graduated from school. Now we're sending them to universities. What needs to be put in place by the government to ensure that when we send our kids to universities, they're going to actually learn, not be indoctrinated with progressive madness?
Well, student safety needs to be prioritised. To be fair, the government has set up a student ombudsman and has been on at the universities just about sexual assaults on campus, etc., but also racism on campus, bullying on campus. So that needs to be a priority. But we need rules that everyone understands. The universities cannot, as a group, even agree upon a common definition of anti-Semitism. They agreed on one back in February, and now they've had a few of the universities back out of it. So Australian National University, RMIT and Macquarie University are not accepting the Universities Australia definition, but they haven't told us what their definition is. How do you expect to have rules and consequences when you still haven't even said what's acceptable? Like, what can you say? Like, what is hate speech? Can you define it? That's what they need to do. They're meant to be our intellectual leaders. It shouldn't be so difficult for them, and they shouldn't be sitting around waiting for government to do it for them.
Indeed, and you have to wonder if Anthony Albanese calls a royal commission, perhaps a spotlight will be shone on our universities and what they did to contribute to the environment that allowed that Bondi terror attack. Natasha, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much.